All right. So basically, this I think it was a nice idea to think about this as the last session. We I took it was like 2 hours for me to read all these chapters, all these 4 chapters. But maybe it could be that I've worked and seen most of the material that we're talking about. But at the same time, of course, I learned some new things I never thought about. So hopefully, I'll give a summary of that. I don't have slides, but I'll give a summary of that, and hopefully, I will be able to um, indicate or give you some stuff, some new stuff. Yeah. So basically, this chapter is talking about visualization, which concludes the diagram we started with. So we basically done the importation of the data, tidying the data, transforming it, doing the model, which was the last chapters, group of chapters. Then going back to visualization, which you still had initially, and then communication. Um, so these are 4 chapters, and basically the first one is talking about R Markdown, which combines your text, your code, and the results. It's good for collaborations and stuff like that. We've worked with this in one way or another. Uh, so we are used to the syntax at least because all of us have presented at least. Then the other part is the graphics. Mainly talking about the grammar of graphics here, ggplot library. And they also give some tips about how to do how to do presentation, for example, how to present, how to do a visual representation of your data. I think that's kind of like very important if you want to improve certain areas. At least for me, I find it very important to read like one blog or two, to get some tips. Then, of course, they talk about some R Markdown formats, which like different forms of Markdown um, formats that you can do in R and you can use. So they talk about the websites. It's good to actually try out and play around and try to have your own website. Books, if you want to write a book. Then, of course, dashboards, which I personally have never used, but at least if you've done a Shiny app or something like that, then you could easily relate to the dashboard to the dashboards. Then the flow is more like a collection of tips, and that's really quick. So yes, so basically the R Markdown is the initial thing where we start from, and I believe the first thing they talk about is, I don't know why I have this thing on my screen. Okay, sorry, I shared only my browser, isn't it? Hello.
So yeah, well,
Yes.
you can see the browser. I don't know if you have anything else on top.
Yeah, I was trying to share the R Markdown, but anyway, we don't have to share it, I think. But anyway, here the key point is that you won't really have access to the help function in R. I don't know what they mean by that, because at least I can get the help for any function I want. Or if you're using R Studio, you can get the help for the function you want, like in the command in the terminal or the command console. But most importantly, when it comes to R Markdown, you can't really use this kind of syntax to get the help. So, but you have access to the cheat sheets in R. So this is actually a very good thing that they did. They put all the cheat sheets in help, under help, and you can go and get the whatever you want, maybe for R Markdown or the reference guide for R Markdown. You can also get like things like dplyr, tidyverse, and things like that, even ggplot. So this is a very good resource to have. Unfortunately, I don't really use it. I have to go to the internet and search stuff, but it's good to know. Yeah. So then, of course, one thing, of course, you need to know is the extension, which is R Markdown. The R is just a modification of the Markdown extension. Then you just need to know that you can add. You need title like the headings of the YAML, or what they call yet another Markdown language. So basically, from here, from the R Markdown, you need to know, of course, where you put your chunk of code. Then you need to know how to play around with the text or the prose when you're writing, for example, comments about your analysis and things like that. And then, of course, after that, you need to, like, what they talk about is how the whole document is processed, but we might not really worry much about this one here. It's kind of like important, but at the same time, it's something you can always get back to later on. It's not really something you need to stress about how it's really processed. But basically, if you've never done R, you always start with Markdown, then you get like a Pandoc compiler, then it produces your output. So what happened is that I think this guy Yi wrote the knitr package, and it connects the R Markdown to the Markdown syntax that we know. But basically, R Markdown syntax is the same as Markdown syntax, pretty much the same. Yes, of course, you could do things like header, different levels of headers, bulleting and lists. Then you can add links. You can also add like captions and images. And you can do tables. So much stuff here. And of course, you can also do the block functions, which we have used. Okay, so we're sharing. I'm sharing now the screen actually, and I'll start a Markdown file. R Markdown, then go to document, whatever, HTML, and say okay. Yes. So basically, this is what we're looking at, and when you start, they actually show you a sample document that you can start with, and this is actually really important to just try out, run, and see what happens. But the block code is something written with this. Starting with this I don't know what to call it, symbol, with this symbol. So you write this symbol, and you can write whatever you want. This is a block. Yeah, so it's kind of intuitive actually. If you want to get a reminder of Markdown, you can always go on the internet and see all these things, like 10 minutes read or stuff like that. I never really remember most of them. And yeah, so one other thing to note is that with code chunks, actually there's a lot of options that you can set. And there is about 60 options that you can set, which of course, you might need some of them, you might not really need all of them, definitely. So it's just good to know that those exist. And the most important ones are the ones for evaluation, whether you want to evaluate the code or not, whether you want to include the code in the document or not, whether you want to present the code. I mean, present only the output or the code and not the code itself. And of course, one thing that might be annoying is the messages and warnings that come up, which wouldn't make sense for someone you want to present your result to. So it's always good to turn those off. And of course, there is so many other things that you can look out for. But one thing, of course, we know is that as long as we know they exist, then we're good to go. We can always try to search when you want to do something. Then, of course, there is tables. You could use cable function in knitr. You could use the GT function, which is kind of like an interactive table. I kind of like them much better than cable, but mainly, of course, because I've never used cable really. And I find GT tables more intuitive. But there's of course pros and cons for each table making package that you're going to use. Then another thing you need to know is the caching. So caching is basically important or beneficial when you're running big chunks of data or operations that take a long time. So what you do is that you name your chunks, and you could kind of catch them. Not kind of, but you catch them using this option. So you catch them in a sense that they are stored like in a RAM somewhere on a disk, so that when if that code is not changed at all, then you can then R just picks up the previously obtained results for that chunk name. So that can be very handy. However, the issue would come if you, for example, have two chunks and they're related to each other, but you haven't changed the one that you've cached, but you change the one that is that chunk is dependent on. So in that case, you have other options, of course. You can do depend on, things like that, to indicate that if the other chunk is changed, then you cannot, then this one also needs to be re-updated. So I think that was a very smart move that they did. And of course, you could also do some global changes to the options so that you don't have to do it like, every time. For example, you could change echo to false if you don't want the code to be shown in your report, and you don't want to change it for each of the chunks that you're creating. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it here. And let's see whether they had something important. Yeah, so the last thing we could talk about, the second last thing we could talk about here is the parameters. So you could set parameters actually. For example, here, if you want to create, they say if you want to create a document or a report for each, for example, for each of each branch, each student, each country or something like that, then you could use parameters. And these parameters, for example, saying for each, for example, for each category or for each branch name, then you could just pick up that branch name and attach and run all the code based on for that branch name and output the report. So I think that's really very, very good if you want to generate reports on demand. And one thing you can also do here is that you could actually run R code in those parameters. For example, by using this exclamation mark R and write the R code on the side. So basically this is it. And this is something I didn't know what to do, how to do it. I've just been seeing people saying, oh, I ran this report in R, but I didn't know how they would do it. But so it was really good to see. But at the same time, of course, you can also have the parameter. You can supply the parameters as a list or as an atomic vector, basically. So, for example, one example could be like this one here, the one we see down here. So here they're rendering this Markdown file, and they are supplying the parameters to that Markdown file. So R will just understand the parameter given, and then it will produce everything relevant for that parameter. And of course, here they have an example where they use map, the par function, function, and this is an example of how they show that you could actually generate reports iteratively. So it was a very good example, I think. And actually, the main thing is they use pwork to go through each row. And lastly, of course, if you're writing like academically or some kind of like formal, some kind of like report which requires citations, then you could do that with bibliography. It's not that hard, at least. I mean, for me, it's not that hard. But if you're not used to biblatex or latex or whatever, or Zotero or EndNote, then it might be a little bit tricky. But at the same time, like you can always get an example, because the only thing you need to have is LaTeX installed on your computer. And if you need it, R will tell you that you need to install it. So just in case you want to do something like this, it's not hard at the same time. Yes. Then, of course, at the end, you have things like it's good to know JIT, because you keep the version, you control the versions for your code or for your reports. And at the same time, there is some tips about how to write, how to organize, how to present your information and things like that. These are some of the things I haven't really seen, but I'll have to check them out. I think I might learn one thing or two. So yes, lessons in clarity. I think this was the one I'm interested in looking at. Yes, so any questions so far?
Not from me.
No, thank you.
All right, now we can move on to graphics. So graphics is, it's just, of course, like it's just about presenting the information, and I don't even know what mainly to say here, but let me try to see what to talk about. Anyway, but with graphics here, what they talked about is more of like how to do annotations, like beyond the starting of having a graph, like ggplot. What is ggplot? Layering of things in ggplot. On top of that, they talk about labeling, and labeling here they mainly talk about this lab function in ggplot, where you could include the title, you could include the subtitle and the caption, basically. And I mean, that's pretty much it. It's more like improving your graphs. And after that, they talk about the annotations. So annotations are basically, where was it? Before annotations, actually talk about like expressions, like if you want to write math functions and stuff like that. So you have things like quote that you could use. But I think quote is part of plot math. But at the same time, of course, you could use ggtext. Ggtext should also be able to do something like that. And there's some other functions, some other packages that are coming up. But well, most of the time we don't really need these. Yes. So yes, after that there is the annotations. So annotations is of course writing words and stuff like that. And so here what they did is basically they got the full they got the full data set. Then they just grouped by class. So basically they got a single unique class name. And what they did was they just wanted to put put the names of those classes on the plot, just as an example. But you could replace this by, for example, the highest, the dots with the highest values, whatever you want to do. Here they use ggtext, but at the same time you could use geom label. So geom label is kind of like the same thing, but I think geom label has kind of a better intuitive way of communicating or changing things. For example, I like the nudge Y and nudge X, and you could also do like alpha. I think you have some other things like changing the background or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, on top of that, there's also different things you could use, like GG repel package, which has geom label repel and things like that, so that things are not cramped up in the same place. So besides labeling, they talk about the scaling. And of course, so here the focus is like these things I'm also talking about them. I've used some of them, but every time I want to do them, I know it exists, but I just go to the internet and search for something. Like I search for the vignettes for these packages, and just see examples. So you don't have to try to, of course, think about remembering all of these. So yes, and after I think there was this geom label repair we've seen. Then there is the scale. The scale function is also quite interesting. I think it's down here. So scale is basically playing around with the axis and see what you could change. You could change the labeling. You could change the tick marks, where the tick marks, or what they call breaks are. You could change. You could zoom in and zoom out at the same time. So basically, yeah, this is what they do. So you can change the scale of Y if it's continuous. If it is discrete, then instead of continuous here, you have discrete. Then you put the breaks for continuous like this. You could specify whatever you want. You could even have like only 2 and 7, and that's all you have to change here. Instead of the sequence, you just write a vectors 2 and 7, and that's it. Then of course you could choose to include whether you want to include the scale on the in the labels or in the what's it called? You could choose whether you want to show the labels here. At the same time, you could also choose whether you want this scale on the legend. Well, I think here you can either use it here or you use it in guide. There's another function called code guide. But anyway, you could just know you can do a lot of kind of crazy things. One thing I could mention here was we can go to zooming. So zooming here was more like playing around with the X limit and the Y limit. So the difference here is that they did the zooming in a specific area, but it's not really easy to see because it's kind of like have the same things. They did the same thing, but the plot on the right, they actually created this scale or this range of data using filtering before they plotted. And when they did that, actually they kind of produce a different, not kind of, they produce a different weird range. Yeah, the data points are the same. But if they actually instead use the Cartesian plot, they don't change the data. They just use the Cartesian plot function to zoom in a specific area. Then it kind of gives you a better overview of what you're working with. Honestly, I don't know how to choose to do this, but I think it's aesthetic or whatever you want to present. You could try out different things and see what happens. I personally, I don't know how to decide when to do this exactly, especially for example in this case. But at the same time, I don't know which model would be better in a way here, because this one is going up and down and it's really looking weird. But I think we'd rather have a smooth curve. So the code Cartesian here, kind of zooming would be much better. So yeah, that's it. And then another good thing was it this one here? It was actually I think I skipped it. Yeah, no, I'm still on it. It's about the scales. So you could change the if you have, for example, 2 plots you're drawing separately, you could make them have the same scales or same ranges on the X and Y axis for easy comparison. And of course, this depends. If right now we know we can actually do this with faceting. You know, but in case you can't do faceting, you can always do this kind of thing. Yes, let's see. And so one thing to note is that I think here, I thought this was quite smart to write something before and just add it on like that. There was a function. This is something I've never done, but I think I might be interested in doing. Then of course they talk about the themes, the different themes, and you can create your own theme, blah blah blah. As I don't know, it depends on your test you want and things you want to do. Then of course the last thing is saving the plots. So here the main thing we have to think about in saving the plots. Of course we know you can save ggplot. You can do a PDF, and is a vector kind of like document. So it's really good. It's a good resolution that you get, better than PNG or JPEG. So I think like for me, at least right now in my work, I use SVG because it's kind of easier to work with higher resolution. At the same time, of course, also has its own problems. For example, if you're adding it in documents. But yeah, anyways, that VGSave is good to know. Then the sizing here, I think this is something that we need to keep in our minds whenever we're dealing with figures. We need to come back to this document when we confused or we get different versions of figures. Come back to this document and read about it. So it talks about aspect ratio, talks about the width and wide and the height of the documents. I mean of the plots, how they're output. So it talks about the aspect ratio mainly here, and gives this example. So he says that you could have a figure like this where you have the width of the figure width of 4. And this is what you have. Of course, he has set the aspect ratio, I think, to 0.7 or something like that. But this looks a little bit closing to blurred, like it's quite huge. But at the same time, you could reduce it to 6 and you get something better, something slightly better than that. At the same time, if you chose the wrong width, which is, for example, 8, then you have very tiny dots and very tiny labels, axis labels. So these are things actually we need to play around with: the width, the out width, the figure width, the figure width, and the aspect ratio. And he also finishes by talking about how to change the aspect ratio. So for example, if you had fig width of 6 and out width of 0.7, because there's a difference between the output from ggplot and what actually is seen in the plot. So that's what you need to balance out. And so basically here, he's more of like uses mappings like algebra in math. If 6 is equal to 0.7, what about 0.5? You know, things like that. Then from there, you can figure out that fig width is equal to 4.3. And this was actually quite nice, you know, to easily get your value rather than trying out different things. I think that's it for now for this one here, for the graphics for communication. And of course, he talks about some tips. So the main part in this last chapter that are tips if you want to develop and improve your skills. So there's the GG2plot book. I don't know that was this one here. Elegant Graphics is not really available, I think, online. However, you can also look at the ggplot, ggplot2 book, which is online, actually. It kind of provides good information too. All right, so any questions for now?
I've got a superficial one. What's your favorite theme? I'm just trying to learn what people like to use the most.
Yeah, so for me, I always go for minimal. Right. Yeah, I go for minimal mainly, but because it removes the kind of like makes the grid very faded. So it's this one here. It's still there, and I also removes the lines, the axis lines and stuff like that. So I think those are the ones that I use. I think it's minimal mainly, or most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some people. Sorry.
I was just going. Sorry, go on, finish.
Now, some people also use classical if you want to see like the lines for the start.
Yeah. However, do you have a favorite? I'm just really curious about how people actually use art in the wild.
Yeah, I'm relatively new to art. I mean, I say that about like a year into using art regularly. And I don't know, I'm quite happy with the default most of the time. So I don't think I've grown sort of tired of it yet. But yeah, I do like minimal for like when you actually want to have like a more impactful graph, I think it helps to remove a lot of like the background sort of noise. But in general, like I like seeing the grid relatively clearly just to have a better idea of like the numbers that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And also for me, so I always like to change to modify my own theme components. So minimal, if I start from the base, then I change to minimal, it kind of gives me a sense of what do I need to change, you know, and what is lacking from the minimal. So it varies, more like back and forth.
I think you're right there. It's what all the sort of data viz books recommend, isn't it? Taking away all the non-essential data ink and all that. So it looks like a good starting point. Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that was it for the graphics for communication. And now the second last is these R Markdown formats, which, well, there isn't much to see here apart from the different outputs and basically, let's see what I went. I don't think I went to the outputs. Yeah. So there is different outputs you could have. For example, which I keep on skipping this. But anyway, yeah. So from the output here, from the header, YAML header, you could actually identify or state what output you want to have. And there is always a list, I think, of outputs you can have. Maybe from here, from the documents section here, you could choose whatever you want to have here: PDF, HTML, Word, not really notebook. I haven't really done that, but at least I've used PDF, Word, and HTML at least. The rest I haven't really used, but at least there is. You just need to know there is others. So of course we can also before we move on we can note that we can see that there is different. You can also do presentations here. So if you used to LaTeX, you could do Beamer and things like that. You could also do Review.js. Then Zaringan is also kind of related to this. Pretty much nothing really changes. But anyway, going back to that. So this chapter here talks about the outputs you could have, how you could change the options. It talks about the different documents we've seen: PDF, Word, ODT, RTF, and yeah, whatever they have. Then you can also do notebooks. So I think in my life, I've only done one R notebook, but it's pretty the same syntax. So that's a good thing. Don't really change much. Then from after the notebooks, there's the presentations, which they present here. They only talk about review, but where we've done Zaringan, I hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. But at least we've used that in our presentations. So there's also there is I think if we're still here, I would greatly recommend this book, the Book Down book, because it tells you pretty much actually everything. So there is a notebook, what you need to know. Then there is a PDF, you know, how to, I think, do like table of contents or something like that. I think that's what they're showing here. I have no idea. But anyway, so they have different parts. And normally what I do, I come here, I search, and just says Zaringan. And yeah, I just go there and look at what they're telling me from there. Just have a quick intro about the things. It's actually pretty short chapters. So it is really good. And you could also, for Zaringan, you can also look at the CSS themes, how to have your custom CSS and things like that. They do the same for Review.js, pretty much everything you have, even the websites. So everything in this chapter, they talk about in this chapter actually, they actually present in more detail in the bookdown.org book. So it's just something good to know. Yeah, so after that, they also talk about some dashboards, which, well, like I said, I haven't really used, but well, it exists. Then the dashboards are kind of related to, I think, Shiny, maybe the way they work, but they're related to the interactivity thing for me, at least according to me. And under interactivity, they have the HTML widgets, they have the Shiny apps. And of course, yeah, here you just need to know some bit of HTML and some bit of maybe CSS to learn the working of stuff. JavaScript maybe not that much, unless if you want to have something more customized, you know, because anyway, the details might not be that fancy. But yeah, apparently you could have a Shiny app, I guess, in a document, which was something new for me. Like, you know, you could actually output an HTML. If it is an HTML document, you could just add runtime Shiny, then import the Shiny library, and you could do things like this. And what this does is that it has an input, and the input is called name, and it's like a parameter. And basically you can actually query that parameter like this: input.age, input.name, whatever. This is the name, this is the handle, and then you have the content, or I don't know what to call it, maybe the variable that you've got from there, the value of the input. Yeah, then lastly, we can talk about the websites, which, well, if you want to have your own website, you could do that. And learning more. So learning more is this actually: how to do presentations, how to give talks and things like that. Also, I think the other two things for me I'm interested in are these two: information, some kind of like how to present the dashboard, good dashboards and stuff like that. Then also how to, you know, do some design, graphic design, introduce some graphic design in your visualization or communications. Yes. So, does anyone have something to say?
You know, if you're just starting to work with a data set and you're kind of doing your own exploratory data analysis and stuff, do you do that as a script, or do you do that in Markdown?
Yeah, so for me, actually, I start with a script, you know, at least for the initial bit before I transfer everything to the Markdown. But I'm trying to change that, because sometimes it creates double work.
Right.
Yeah, but that's what I'm just used to, at least for, especially I want to be able to read the data in a script so that I can play around with the cleaning from there. But for the exploration, I can always move to the to the Markdown file.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. However, what do you do?
I always start with the notebook because I find it helps. It makes me like, it makes it easier to keep documentation going, and it doesn't like, well, I mean, it makes it easy. It doesn't make it, you know, like automatic, but when I have like an R Markdown file, because I can just very easily make notes, it makes it easier for me to just like write my thoughts down as I'm working through something, so that when I come back to it, it's clear why I did what.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, because for me, what I do normally is I keep on adding a lot of comments in the script, which is kind of like, like I said, it's double work. But I just like the interface from the script better than actually the one in the Markdown. I don't know. It's a weird test.
But I think it's what you get used to more often than not. If you start out like, and you spend ages doing something one way, then that's intuitive. So like, as long as you're adding your thoughts as comments, then it's practically the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is in a sense, definitely. Of course, unless if you want to share, to share the report to a whole other group.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Cool.
Nice. Okay, and lastly, here they have some tips about the workflow. It's not much of the workflow though. More like things you need to do, things to keep at the back of your mind. So like this is also going back to our question, like what have I said, you know, what do notebooks do, or R Markdown, what does it do? It's more like linking between the 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 code and the notes, but at the same time it's at the same time it helps you record your thoughts. So that's that's the main thing here. So I mean, you don't have to forget anything. It's kind of like written down already. If some other person comes to your code, they can easily see that also. And most likely, most times, I think when you're writing with R Markdown, maybe you don't have to adhere to the way you write comments, but you could just write free text in a sense, you know, and it might be much better to understand. Then of course they write things like you need to write the date of your workbook or your notebook. You could also, I think you could also do this with Git, you know. At the same time, there's some other issues about keeping track of the packages that you've loaded, and they talk about some thing2 packages here, Packrat and Checkpoint. Never used those ones here. But anyway, or maybe something to think about at a later time. Yeah, and things like session info to keep track of the loaded packages for that workbook that you had, at least, so that when you go back to it, you know the packages that were loaded. I think that was it. I think, yeah, that was it. The last one was about naming convention, and of course there's different blogs talking about how to name your files and stuff like that. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Alan. That was a very good summary.